Hey, Mako.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Um,
I see all different paintings behind you today.
Yeah, I just finished this one, the silver one, and it I've been for some reason I've been wanting to do silver paintings, and silver of course tarnishes over time. So I have been thinking a lot about, kind of work that takes years to be formed.
Mhm.
So I was very conscious of it with this piece where, as you can see, it's irregular. It's not perfectly gilded, and that's on purpose to accentuate the, rather than trying to do things perfectly, you do things imperfectly and see if that can reveal something. And it's been an interesting journey pursuing um, maybe immaculate work, rather than immaculate work, and silver, because it tarnishes, it is immaculate in that sense. It will always change, and it somehow feels more true to our time, and my being, as we think about life, and you know vulnerabilities, and maybe the way in is imperfection and weakness, and being vulnerable to that.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. This past week I put up on Instagram a poll asking people what questions they would ask, and one of them was
Oh,
actually connected to this.
huh.
Um, and it's how do artists find their language?
Yeah. Wow.
And I think what you're speaking about in how you're discussing this painting specifically
Yeah.
is how you have come to find your language as an artist.
Yeah, I think so. And continuing to, you're really never there, but I think it was George Plimpton who said writers find their voice in when write a sentence that doesn't work, or, that they feel is a failure. And, maybe if you have a good friend or editor who can see that, who's something very unique in so-called mistake or something imperfect, that you're not really satisfied with, personally, but on the other hand, it reveals something about you. And I do think it has something to do with that, where um, you're just in a mode of working and trying to do something well, and then you fall short of that, and yet, when you really look at it, there's something beautiful about the imperfections of it.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think about the very specific visual vocabulary that
Hmm.
artists develop.
Hmm.
Um, and when you were first making,
Hmm.
can you think of things, moments? Like,
Hmm.
I think about the moment we had in the studio in 2000
Hmm.
when the silver acted so differently. But
Yes, yes.
even going farther back, like when you were in grad school, for example, right?
Yeah.
Like, do you have those moments where you're like, the material, is it the
Hmm.
material that's leading you towards a visual
Hmm.
vocabulary, or is it your inner vision for what a work is going to look like, or is it both? How does that work for you as an artist?
Yeah, I definitely have learned to listen to my work and let it lead me. And writers will sometimes talk about their characters leading them. You start out thinking about a character, interesting story, and as you're writing, that character kind of takes off, and starts to do unexpected things. So things that maybe you're not expecting, or you don't even want to. And yet a good writer would be able to steward that moment. And so in painting, I definitely have learned to pull back a little bit and listen to what was happening. I think we did catch a moment when I realized that, the silver wasn't drying, or the layers that I put underneath it were preventing it from doing what I expected that it would do. In fact, 9 out of 10 times it would do dry in a certain way, and it wasn't doing that. And so I just took advantage of it, began to distress that, and I just saw the painting in my daughter Lydia's new apartment in Brooklyn, and it 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 is interesting that works that kind of leaps out of your expectation ends up being something of a signature piece, that you can continue to learn from and develop.
Yeah. And I think also how you speak about the silver and its mutability over time, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
the maculate, the
Yes.
the
Yeah.
transitory time that we find ourselves in.
Mhm, mhm,
Um,
mhm.
someone else asked that we speak about birds, and something that I've been hearing about birds from multiple sources
Yeah.
recently is that when humans hear bird song,
Yeah.
it it causes us to relax because
Yes.
historically our nervous system is like birds aren't going to be scared off
Ah, I
by
see.
predators.
Yeah, I see.
Like it's a sign that there are no predators in the area,
I
right?
see. I see.
And
Yeah.
I think it also points to the fragility of our humanness that
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
sometimes forget in this time, in this exquisite information age. We think that because we have access to knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
that things will not harm.
Mm, mm.
And
Interesting.
so,
Yeah.
what does that mean? And how does
Yeah.
that tie into the fragility of making and
Yeah.
to the bird song
Yes.
and all of those elements together?
Yeah, that's so interesting. I have heard that birds sing in sound pitch, that frequency, um, that is perfectly suited for humans.
Mm,
So they don't, in other words, they don't sing above what
mhm,
we cannot hear,
mhm, mhm,
or below. And I mean, how is that possible? Like what is that about? You wonder. And since I love birds, and here at Fuji Farm, that we kind of I try to let things grow, and um, not cut the grass in the typical way. Let things grow so they have a place to hide, or um, and so we over the years we've attracted a lot of birds that perhaps would be considered rare, and I just love learning from watching them. There's one little chipping sparrow just now, because I was watering the plants, or trees. It's so dry and hot here. You know how the hose kind of sometimes, when you connect them, it doesn't connect perfectly, right? Talk about immaculate, and there's a little spray coming, and this chipping sparrow was like bathing in it. I was like, wow, that's beautiful, and um, and and so there's something about nature. Two things there, right? One is this uh, kind of this harmony that we are enjoying, that this safety that you noted of birds' songs and surroundings, giving us a home, in a sense, a safe place. And the other is kind of this fallenness of how I feel, um, definitely as a human being, unable to do the things that I want to do, or I ought to do. Um, and this lack of perfection in that sense, um, leads me to consider things, that are speaking to me in that realm. so in other words, I am listening to birds and I hear sadness. So I hear a dove, morning doves, really sonorous, deep, and it reminds me of my longing or sadness that I feel about things, or very Japanese, in that sense. And Japanese have always connected beauty with death. So something is most beautiful. Cherry blossoms are, of course, beautiful when they're in full blossom, but it's even more beautiful when they are falling. That kind of an idea. And so there's both going on where you feel at home, and yet when you really deeply experience nature, something would trigger in us that longs for a true home. Like we feel like there has to be something on the other side of eternity that is calling us. And there's something about bird songs that perhaps in ways that I can't explain, that will trigger those thoughts.
And all of these elements that we're discussing, they have that temporal element. They have
Yeah.
the cherry blossom falling. It's beautiful in that split second that it catches the light through the petal, right?
Yeah,
That
exactly.
can't be replicated, that can't be captured.
Right. You can't just cut the flower and put it in a vase. It's a moment that is infinitely, it's ephemeral. So it's a paradox in that sense, and I think perhaps that's why we value it so much. And I have these bluebirds nesting here, and every year it seems like it's a new pair. With I don't, sometimes I think maybe I had once I recognized the male bird twice in consecutive years, but and you just realize they don't live that long, and so they have to nest and keep producing offsprings in order to survive the harsh winters. And I in my next book I write about a friend of mine telling me that um, male bluebirds are the most blue when they have experienced the harshest of winters, or the ones that survive that, the harshest conditions are the ones that has the bluest color, and there's something very poignant about that.
Yeah. It's, in a sense, it's the animal kingdom's version of kintsugi.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, no, I think I link that to idea of imperfection and kintsugi, and something that we don't normally consider when we think about survival is that in natural kingdom, oftentimes the harsh, cruel survival mechanism can turn into something beautiful. And again, that when you look at it strictly from survival mode, or Darwinian mechanism, it it may say something about attraction to the mate and so forth, but there's some inexplicable extravagance behind this as well. And there's something about the whole nature of being a bird, that is both fragile and extraordinary. That the birds have this, a simple little goldfinch, carries so much weight, you know, in terms of, I mean, gives me joy to see the yellow, bright yellow. Um, but at the same time, they're tiny little beings that for some reason have survived all this harsh, realities and winters, and we get to see flowers and in the same way. So there's a mystery there, you know.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it's that highlighting of a specific experience
Yeah,
in
yeah,
visual form.
yeah. And artists, we are sensitized to that, and we try to capture that in a sense. Even if you're not painting a bird, your work behind you is very much about capturing that moment, the ephemeral, something that is passing or drying, in front of you, and it's constantly moving, and somewhat uncontrollable, but then you have parameters, um, to as an artist, to steward that uh, mutability, um, of water and salt, and so there's something very much parallels what we see in the world, so we see in beauty of the birds, and that gets translated, I think, even unconsciously into our work.
Mhm. Yeah. I've recently reread Parable of the Sower. Dr. Tamisha Taylor is doing a
Ah,
book discussion this summer on it through the Center for Restorative Justice. And so I just reread it in preparation for that.
yeah,
And it got me thinking about the prophetic work of the artist, right?
yeah, yeah.
Because Butler wrote this over 20 years ago, almost 30 years ago. And the events that she's describing, she put it in this time,
Mm,
and there's such extreme parallel, right?
mm, wow.
Um, and it makes me think about what is the role of the artist, but also what is the role of the prophetic in creating a future world?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so the question to you is, what do you want to prophesy for the future?
Yeah,
I don't
and
know theologically if prophecy
oh
can work that way,
my
but
goodness.
or just say,
Right.
you know,
Yeah, the prophetic reality is not just in predicting the future, but in some sense, we our friend Erwin McManus says, human beings are the only species that can create the future, you know,
mhm,
uh, and so we can turn ideas into something of a future reality. And in a sense, we have to do that, right? Because everything else is in entropy, right? So in this natural cycle, basically, if we don't steward the garden, it will be taken over by weeds and so forth. Um, so art is definitely prophetic in that sense, because we are creating something new. And I think whether you have faith, religious faith or not, you have faith in that process of, you're facing a blank canvas, and you have to have faith, or hope, at least, that will become something new into the world and provide a portal into something only you can provide, right? So in that sense, it's always in pursuit of this creation, new creation, that the material, mastery of the material will allow us to persuasively invite others into a world that we long to see. So art is inherently prophetic. Anything we make, as human beings, actually creates the future. right? Even if you're making an omelet, you're gonna eat it, and that will give you sustenance, and you will do something else with that energy. So you're constantly, we're not just surviving, but we have the capacity to really steward nature's gifts, certainly, and you know, seek beauty, learn from that. But then ultimately, we have the stewardship responsibility to create something that is hopefully enduring, so that it becomes more than surviving, that moment. Um, and during the pandemic and or this ongoing endemic, however you want to frame, status right now, we shouldn't forget that, there, even those of us who are fortunate to be able to create during that time, that there was something inherently needed or hopeful about painting during a shutdown, because you're kind of projecting into the future. And I was very much drawn to birds and flowers here because I was stuck here, but also usually you're running around and you don't notice things as much. You realize that, oh, this hollyhock is, moving from where I planted to, next season it pops up, and squirrel is like replanting the tulips, and all those things, you kind of realize, oh, nature is kind of moving about, and certainly I can be stewarding, move the tulips back, but it's kind of interesting how nature itself has a flow that is suited for us, I guess, in that sense, to um, create something new out of that.
Mhm.
Um, and it kind of triggers and all sorts of things in us that, if we don't slow down and appreciate what is happening, we may miss it, and I began to really appreciate that, and I've continued this kind of meditative practice, if you will, of listening to the land here, and letting these flowers and birds and plants teach me, what is it that, like Wendell Berry says, yeah, there are two approaches to the land. One is to basically raise it so you can do what you industrially, want to do with it, right? That it's completely industrial use. The other is to ask the land what it wants to be, and so I've been practicing listening to the land, and it, interestingly enough, what I do in the studio is exactly the same, right? I'm using minerals and silver and materials that are really embedded in nature and 1,000-year-old history of Japanese art. So I am also, so outside and inside is the same kind of listening mode. Um, and it has amplified, even if I am drawing a line of gold on a piece here, that's connected intuitively to the bird songs and, the peepers, spring peepers coming out in spring, or um, screech owl that I hear far away. Something about that gets in the lines, and I'm, whether I'm conscious of that or not, it I realize at that moment I have, in this privilege of connecting those experiences sound into visual art, and so that is perhaps an entry into the prophetic, because we cannot do, you know, anything without, you know, this reality of nature, um, in a sense, giving us the materials to create.
Yeah. And when I think about all of that, I think theologically, we need to be clear about our ideas of future projection and prophetic as hearing from God's message to the people,
Yeah,
right?
right.
I just want to put the
Yeah,
nuance on
no,
that
that's
for
good. That's good. That's a good reminder. Yeah, because we tend to think of art as this autocratic, you know, ego, self-expression, when it's really, to me, emptying of yourself, to allow the spirit to work through you, but then you have to be open to all sorts of unexpected discoveries.
Mhm.
And oftentimes, you know, works that tend to be more enduring, or works that communicate with people, have this emptying kenosis element to it, that allows others to um, come along and be part of that journey of creativity and imagination. So, you know, I think it's definitely not self-expression, you know, that we are trained in, and perhaps in art schools, and you know, we think of art as ego, you know, and it can be, obviously, but that that to me ultimately doesn't resonate, you know, and so nature teaches us that as well, you know, because it is brutal in a sense of how, you know, you are just part of the ecosystem. It constantly humbles you in that sense, and so I think we get to steward that uncontrollable, chaotic, you know, elements that over time, you know, you're perhaps able to dance with and create something new out of it.
And that kind of ties into the theme of your show that's in Greenville right now, the Mysterion.
Right. Yeah, that show, thank you for mentioning that. And July 26th, it's been going on since January, but you know, it's they created the space in the church that is museum level space. And so they had this museum level show before mine, and they wanted to showcase visual art that way. So we obviously wanted to support that. Fantastic effort to do so in beautiful Greenville, which has a lot going on for itself. And you know, I hope this is the beginning of artists like yourself being able to showcase, you know, their works in a museum like setting, but within the church. So there's a lot of traffic. Obviously, there's a large church there. And so we're actually going to go on Sunday to, because Hejin hasn't seen some of the pieces, you know, they've been in storage, and we shipped it. It's like a fairly large retrospective, because, you know, there was a lot of space. They also made accessible some of the more public walls that are not in the Lens Gallery. But we thought it would be a good way to showcase some of the pieces that are more designed to be in public spaces, and it actually is good for me, and I think it's good for all of us as artists to think about how we can serve the space rather than demand the space to be, So I've learned a lot by doing this, and the same works going to Chautauqua Institute next summer, and because they were more available for public spaces, rather than like protected space. I think that made this other exhibit more probable or possible. So these things you discover, but we're looking forward to seeing them, and we're just so grateful that the space exists.
It's great. It's so good to think about present reality and future possibility.
Yeah, yeah. And every exhibit that you and I have is a conduit to consider those things and open up the possibility. And that's probably the most rewarding thing that an artist can do is if we are able to provide that kind of an opportunity for people, everybody who comes through, including children, right, can think about, oh, okay, this inspires me to do this or create this. And by doing that, you are perpetuating this, cycle of prophetic making, which is amazing. And so all of us can benefit from that. And certainly that's primarily what the church has done in history, right, to provide these great sacred spaces and that invited artists to create into. So I hope that prophetic vision, visual theology, or however you want to call it, theology of making, will be part of future church and museums, and
And maybe the churches will become, more churches will become museums.
yeah, and museums become more sacred. Why not? I think that's it's already, Rothko Chapel is sacred. And not just to push back against darkness, which is important, describe the darkness, but really become a space, communal space where people can stop and pause, just as we would listening to birds, or but there's something profound about being able to think about and meditate on what the future can be, because without that piece, we're in the cycle of violence, right, of survival and anxiety and fear. That and hopefully our art can provide a way to look at the future differently and create the future, in that sense.
So good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mako.
Oh, thanks. This was fun.
Traveling mercies.
Okay. See you, Julia.